Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother.
Wings for freedom. On behalf
of our warriors. And paves the way for a new history.
Dobry večer. Good evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome to Tochnyi. We are privileged today to be joined by Shaun Pinner, who joined the Ukrainian military in 2018, served in the Ukrainian Marines during the Russian invasion in 2022. Shaun led a section of Marines in the fighting retreat to Mariupol. Captured by Russian forces during the siege of Mariupol, he survived Russian captivity, finally being released in September 2022. Shaun, thank you for your service and welcome to Tochnyi.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, Shaun, Ukraine has endured this invasion since 2014. Can you give our audience in the West some of the factors that you think are important in how Ukraine determined its survival up to now?
Well, I could speak of some personal experience, really. I think I came in 2018. I think if Russia and Putin would have attacked Ukraine 3 years prior to 2022, I think it would have been a whole different ballgame, a whole different army. I mean, when I got there in 2018, I think really Ukraine was coming out of that Soviet doctrine of centralized command. And, if you were big, you got promoted, not necessarily with the brains. And there was still very much a lot of that Soviet sort of mentality and that element when I got here in 2018. But having spent 2 years as a sniper instructor with the National Guard and working with people like Azov and the military, over 2 years, I would say over the 3 or 4 years probably, I was actually before the full-scale invasion. A lot of that joint exercises we were doing with the Americans, the Canadians, and the Swedish, and moving away from centralized command and understanding about NATO tactics. I mean, I spent 2 years teaching them, and then 3 years with my Marine unit, teaching guys that really could run and could shoot. I mean, the culture here is very hunting based, and living off the land seems quite natural. I always say that it's the lads in my unit just seemed. I said, do they teach you to top wood and fillet fish and catch fish and strip pheasants when you were at school? And they're like, no, we learned this, after. So they're quite good at that anyway. But what they lacked was like basic combat skills. And I went as a sniper instructor and actually didn't teach them very much about that. What I was really looking at was them and their heavy use on electrical equipment like Google Maps and things like that. They didn't understand, basic infantry skills that could help them, fight the Russians. But what they were really good at and what they taught me was about living off the land in the trenches. And how their logistics is bad, and how now especially now, you can't get a 4x4 or a drone, a 4x4 or a vehicle to some of the positions because of the drone. I mean, going for resupply is one of the most dangerous jobs out there at the moment. It used to be a tank crew member. Now it's going for resupply because the drones will just sit and loiter and wait for you to walk along these footpaths and take you out as you're going back to get the supplies of the oil, the ammunition, and the food. So it's very, very dangerous. And a lot of the Western armies at the moment I talk to now don't really understand that, the situation of fighting on the front. I mean, from personal experience, my defensive exercise was only 3 weeks long in the British Army. But by the time the full-scale invasion came round, we'd moved away from that centralized command. And I think a lot of the success we had in Mariupol was down to those joint exercises like Sea Breeze, where section commanders were able to step in and really take up the role of, let's say, a section commander or a platoon 2IC or a platoon commander that's down. People were able to step into those roles. When I got here, there was no emphasis on NCOs so much. The platoon commander did everything. Then by the time the invasion hit, we had platoon sergeants doing the admin roles. We was and pushing that. Section commanders were section commanders. They had two ICs that stepped in. And so I think I watched that transition over about 5 years in total. And I think that's a real significant factor why I was so confident before the invasion to say we'll give them a bloody nose.
Shaun, did your prior military experience prepare you for war and survival against the invading Russian armed forces? Or was it a case that your comrades around you and yourself were having to adapt completely to the reality that faced you on the 24th of February 2022?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I didn't obviously know when I came in 2018 the political side of it as much, but I brought with me a real solid 9 years experience of learning how to fight Russians in the British Army. I mean, I was part of reconnaissance. I'd had tours in Bosnia and 3 years in Northern Ireland working counter-terrorism, which is not quite the same thing. But I experienced and seen the worst side of war in Bosnia in the early 90s. So it wasn't new to me, but really, the British Army gave me the grounding. I mean, I did my SEER training, my survival, evade, resist, and escape training in Fort Lewis, Washington State in America. So I'd had experience of captivity and resistance training, which hadn't moved on, let's say, 30 years since I did my training. So this was quite important for me I was probably the only guy that had any resistance training in my whole brigade that got, eventually surrounded and captured in Mariupol. So, that really helped me because I could understand the stages of capture. I knew what I had to do to plan. It probably saved my life through captivity. So I was pretty much, that was down to the British military. And then I understood all the technical side of it as well. I spent 9 years learning Russian tactics and vehicles and ordnance, and I brought that with me. So, I was quite surprised when I got to my unit in Ukraine that guys didn't know what a Mon 50 was or a Mon 200 and could put out signal flares. It made me positively Gandalf, to be fair, because I'd had experience with it. So I was like teaching Ukrainians Soviet stuff, and about how to use it, and which is quite interesting. So, but they taught me so much about how to live off the land and how to really supplement my logistics. I mean, I used to take the mickey out of me because I couldn't chop wood properly. I mean, I'd get chopped wood from Tesco's at the garage forecourt down where I live, So I don't have much practice at that, but I loved it. They taught me how to fillet fish, how to catch local produce in the rivers like rack and crayfish to supplement the bad logistics, and they taught me about how to dig in and build solid trench positions, which I hadn't experienced. And of course, I come from a time where mobiles weren't even invented when I joined the military. So, so I've gone to 1984 and Terminator, I keep saying, Mariupol was reminiscent of that. So I've got a good drone background knowledge now, and from working here. And of course, I learned Russian first, not Ukrainian, because of the geographical location where I lived. And my wife's first language was Russian, but she's Ukrainian. She speaks Ukrainian too. But because she was from Crimea and a family from Crimea, they spoke Russian, which is only a byproduct of really Russian colonialism. So I ended up learning that first. So, I learned a great deal, and we give as good as I received here. It was an honor to serve with the Ukrainian Marines.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you for serving Ukraine and the UK and all of Europe. Wood chopping's really flipping difficult. I can attest to that. However, one of my colleagues here, our colleague Erland at Tochnyi, he's in Norway. He seems to find it really easy. So maybe he's got like an axe that cheats or something. But I want to get back to 2022 and the Western support that you felt was either available or not so much back then. How important do you think was Western support to Ukraine's survival in the year of 2022?
Again, I was deployed in 2021, December 2021. So I was too busy in the trenches dealing with the prep invasion and the change in technology. We knew it was on, by the start of January, because they were already bombing positions behind us. The technology had changed around the area. They'd gone from really not being able to drop ordnance at night and having shitty drones they were using, to now seeing Russian fast moves, recons, Lancets, and all the score. So, and suddenly they got thermal capability, which was something we hadn't seen for 5 years I was out there. One of the safest times to move was at night, or it was getting dusk. So this was quite new. But really, my first, I was talking back to the UK and friends and military friends. One of my close friends is Colonel Richard Kemp, who's quite a lot in the media, who was in contact with, and he was updating me on information about, maybe NLAWs were coming, and then about 3 days before the invasion, my really first sort of sight of an NLAW was about 3 days before the full-scale invasion, where I'd fired an NLAW. Law 94 back some 30 years ago, and I was the only one in my platoon that had any experience of firing it, and I found myself looking at this new optic, and I don't know what sort of if it's NLAW 2 or 3.0 or whatever, but I was like, I need to get my head around it. So 3 days before the invasion, I was PDFing a document trying to find the optic for this new NLAW, trying to teach my guys how to work it. And they were really adapted. They adapted very well to it. They picked it up really quickly. They were straight into it. That you got to do this, you got to charge battery, you got to pull this out, pull that out. And they were very quick adapted to that new weaponry they hadn't seen before. In fact, they were so quick on the first day of the invasion, they were actually taking out tanks to the right side of our position near Pavlopol because it was quite shock and awe. And, we had 11 hours of fighting, but they were quiet and they're straight in there using them. So they're pretty adaptable, the Ukrainian bunch. However, I was on the front there and Russia had full air superiority. So there wasn't really much by way of surface-to-air missiles we could use to combat that. I mean, we had the Soviet-made Iglas that were just dreadful, that are now being used to shoot slower-moving drones. But really, they weren't capable of dealing with modern-day jets who just put on the afterburners and flew off. I think in 7 weeks, I saw one plane hit. He must have been eating his packed lunch or something, I think. So I just don't really know. At that point, I'd seen very little by way of Western support, and then I was captured for several months. I talk about it immensely now because it's such a contentious issue. I was talking to you earlier saying, this time last year, we didn't know if there was going to be a Ukraine by summer because we were still fighting this aid bill. And literally, we were just waiting for that to drop because the horror stories coming from the front were, we'd got no rounds and people were shifting artillery rounds further up to the problem areas, and people were using just smoke. And, we were getting to a really, really bad point. And, and this isn't just America bashing. We can't just, America bash. Europe was slow to fill in the shortfall. I mean, it was that bad here. We were constantly wondering whether or not we were going to have a Ukraine, and when the aid dropped, we took a big sigh of relief. So we're not in that place. And even though the aid's been stopped today, generally, in summary, really, it's going to take a while for that to have an effect if it doesn't get turned back on anyway. So, I personally don't think Trump's got a year to wait for a ceasefire. I think he's pushing a ceasefire at all costs, which I think is quite scary, to be fair. But generally, if it doesn't get switched back on, then it could take a bit of time before we see any problems.
Sean, I'm all for upskilling colleagues in the workplace, but for me, this is like fixing basic IT problems and PowerPoints. But you hadn't touched in or been trained on an NLAW till just days before the invasion, and you.
No, the training historically is pretty bad in Ukraine anyway, compared to NATO standards. But what they lack in training, not everything's about NATO standards. So, I try and talk to Western militaries about this. The your standards could be quite a hindrance sometimes. I mean, I thought I had quite a lot of experience, and I was well kitted out, but my platoon commander took me to one side and just sort of said, strip down. You carrying too much weight could end up getting you killed. You need to strip down what you've got. And I was thinking, this is all the stuff I need to fight with. And he's going, no. So I was learning how to strip all of just to the essentials of what I needed. So that, eventually you're just going out with a rucksack full of spare ammo, your fighting gear, and what you would assume you would take in the Western military, sleeping bags, bivvy bags, and all that stuff. No. You can take a blanket if you can fit it in, but most of it's going to be ammo and a day sack, water, and some food. And I was fighting in Mariupol in what I was standing in. So, all that, they're not, it's a different world out here. You've got to move fast and quick through the trenches to avoid the drones and getting hit. So carrying, like I was taught, carrying big Bergens and day sacks and, 75 pounds worth of gear on your back with all your, no, it just doesn't happen here. It's just not like that. And now you've got the added drone threat as well. I mean, that's just adding more problems. But no, I didn't see much. The training is quite bad. They don't train in communications, we found as well, which is quite strange. So we had Harris radio, but about 3 of us had Harris radio. 3 of us knew how to work the Harris radio. And 2 of us were Westerners. Our platoon commander. So most of the guys used Motorola's, which I found kind of really strange because they're not secure and they're open frequency. And the commander would have 2 or 3 Motorola's, and they'd just think, why are we not using the Harris radio? I mean, it was absolute garbage. And my only draw was that we'd had 8 years to prepare in Mariupol. I don't remember seeing a meal ready to eat, for quite a long time through Mariupol. What we did have went in the first days of the first week of the attacks and the full-scale invasion. So I thought it was very badly logistically planned out, Mariupol. It didn't stop us raiding shops, supermarkets, anything that had been bombed out, shipping food in. Command and control was actually exceptionally very good up until April the 12th and 11th. But generally, when I got to Mariupol in the first week of March, or 1st of March, it was the command and control was exceptionally good. We knew exactly where the Russians were coming in and how many there would be and what we would do to attack them. Stand twos were good, and even when we took people, like I said, people were slotting into gaps and places. And but I was pretty confident before the invasion that we would give them a bloody nose, and we did. So, we knew quite early on in Mariupol that our job was then with the 200 kilometer encirclement, that we would have to really just hold the ground there and take up exhaust all their supplies and ammunition and things like that. So we knew quite early on we weren't going to get rescued. But when the order came to break, we were good at trying to get out.
Well, Shaun, Ukraine's allies in Europe, we're pretty concerned about the magazine depth on Ukraine's Patriot battery interceptors. And I've got to ask you, the recent pause in military aid announced today from the US Trump admin, how might this impact Ukraine's daily struggle to survive this invasion, both in the short and the long term, from your perspective?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, we're not in the same place as we were a year ago, as I keep saying. I mean, Europe's cranked up its gears, and the Czech initiative's brought in artillery shells, and by all accounts we can survive till summer apparently. But there's no reason why we can't survive for another year. And like I said, we survived a year with no ammunition, low ammunition, and a shortage of artillery shells. So I think it's we're not going to see an effect of this for some time. Whether Trump's got the time for that, I don't know. But yeah, it is worrying. I think, like I said, Europe stepped up, and you can see all the activity that's going on now. I'm pretty confident after seeing Russian tactics and having worked with NATO that Russia wouldn't stand a chance with NATO if they came into started attacking a NATO country. So, and in my opinion, when we found out North Koreans were coming into the theatre of war, and we've already got Iranian drones. I think we should have moved in NATO down to the Dnieper River anyway. I think we missed an opportunity there. I just think we should, NATO was set up as a defensive organization for this very thing. We're not going to wait until they get onto NATO's doorstep before we decide to act, and yet we didn't do anything, which is, even now North Korea is scarcely mentioned, and they've just sent in reinforcements. So it's very scary time, because we're not fighting just Russia, we're fighting the Russian Federation, all the countries that support Russia, Iran, North Korea, and we still don't understand really China's, where China fits into it, and how much they're pumping into this. So essentially, it's quite worrying that nobody's actually doing anything or saying anything about this yet. And we're still sort of wondering 3 years on whether we're going to have enough rounds or artillery or air defense missiles to deal with, now that Trump's cancelled all support for Ukraine. It's no surprise. I called it before it happened. I sort of said it seems to be strategic. Elon's pulled all the US aid out. Globally, there's a real humanitarian aid problem, but that's the fabric, that's the stitching that holds the fabric together in some of those most dangerous places on the front line. The families are being paid by those humanitarian aid organizations, risking their lives, dropping aid in, picking people out, taking casualties out. So projects have stopped, demining stopped. So, that was the first stage. And then now I said after that, it's bound to be the stop of military aid. And I think it's a premeditated, pre-planned decision to stop aid to Ukraine. And I think the Oval Office was just the icing on the cake. I think it was totally planned. But yeah, I mean, it's a worrying time. We're still talking about problems we had 3 years ago.
Thanks, Shaun. I mean, we've seen the developments from the White House over the last few days, and we can all recognise an ally when we see one, and they don't look like an ally, do they?
Not at all, no. It's really worrying when you have Tulsi Gabbard and just line by line repeating Putin's propaganda, and now she's in a high power, these people are in high power positions with, safeguarding American security. And what bugs me is that in the same word and the same sentence, you can listen to it for now. You'll move forward and listen to it. In the same sentence, he mentions the word peace. He will still mention Russian propaganda, which is false information, which is really worrying. It's left a really nasty taste in people's mouths, because if you're talking a peace deal, you don't start then mentioning the propaganda of the invading force that's coming into the country. So it's a really dangerous time, and I think the whole thing has been mishandled, which is why I don't believe 1 minute he's an ally. There's too many contradictories there to even call them an ally. It's really a disturbing time.
Agree, Shaun. I've got to ask you just one question, if I could, about your book, because survival is a theme in your book, like Live, Fight and Survive. And I remember you talked about this actually at the Trafalgar Square rally when I saw when you spoke there last year. So you speak about a number of survival experiences during your book, from combat experiences to the survival of your capture and subsequent imprisonment. And I'm just wondering, how can we, as Ukraine's allies in the West, help more Ukrainians survive? There's 4.5 million of them that Russia says they've deported to Russia. How can we help them survive? I know it's a big question, but I thought
it's quite a large question. I mean, you can't, as a military man, I tell people you can't really underestimate the value of hope. I mean, for me, you wouldn't put it in any military plan, because if you've relied upon hope, you haven't planned hard enough, to be fair. Or you've made a mistake. So generally, as a military guy, we don't talk about hope enough. But when you've had every ounce of humanity stripped from you, and you've been dehumanized, as much as I was, sometimes hope's all you've got left. And if you lose hope, you are gone. That's it. It's over. So it's really important that we don't talk about that enough in the right context, because if you lose hope, that's game over for anybody. And then really, I'd had a lot of training prior to my captivity. I mean, I got through captivity. They didn't know my army background. They hardly knew I spoke even Russian. And also, they had no idea that I'd done resistance training. So for me, when I was exchanged, it was quite a goal, a win. And I'd confirmed you have to stay positive through even the most darkest times. And even I struggled sometimes to keep it together, because because I'd had some training, you become a sounding board and a leader, and people are asking you questions and thinking about why you know so much about this sort of stuff. And generally, I was trying to bounce that back and stay the grey man, everything I was taught. But generally, people start to know that you're someone that knows what's talking about. So generally, I mean, you've got to stay positive. So I hid my emotions for quite a lot of the time, but sometimes it's quite good to let that emotion go and be upset at the right times and vent and, in a controlled manner. And it's not a bad thing to do that. I still get upset at the right times, and I don't break down, like when I'm carrying mashed potato out of a microwave or something, or, or sausages or something when I'm cooking. I don't just break down, but I do when I'm talking about it, get upset sometimes. I talk about lost comrades, and that's quite normal. I think there's going to be less of an issue with things like PTSD here, because everyone can relate to everybody else, because everybody here's lost somebody. So I don't believe I see so much of that. Yes, people are tired. Yes, people are upset. Yes, some people have anxiety levels, but generally there's always somebody here to pick them up, because everybody's going through the same situation. It's not like going to Iraq or Afghanistan where, after a 6 to 8 month tour, a door kicking and fighting, you come back to America or Great Britain and you're the only one that knows what you've seen. I mean, that's a lot of pressure on people. So generally there's a lot of good people, a lot of help here for people, and I think they do very well. I mean, Ukrainians are so resilient anyway. I mean, in a broader spectrum, I just don't know. I can't answer the question fully. It's going to take a lot of rebuilding. I mean, this is the most heaviest mine place in the world right now. I mean, it's going to take a lifetime to get rid of just the mines. And you're talking about a lot of elements thrown in. There's 1.3 million veterans here now. And really, we're just putting together a first policy for veterans, which is long overdue, which I just spoke in Lviv quite recently about that. So we are making inroads. Ukraine isn't perfect, but they are making inroads into anti-corruption and the policy for veterans, and trying to deal with this while there's a bloody war on. So, it isn't easy. I still wonder myself how we get through and how cosmetically we're getting through despite what's happened. I mean, people go out to work, people just, get bombed and then open up the cafe again, or, fix it. And there's people on the streets clearing the debris off. And, it's just, to the untrained, I've become accustomed to it, but to people that get over for the first time, they just think, my God, you guys are just, so resilient. And we are, but it's just every day now, like I was just telling you, we just got Shahid last night and drone flew over the house. And, my mum's texted me when I posted it, went, why weren't you in the shelter? And I was like, because people need to know what's going on, and I can assess those situations where it's quite safe, and where it's past the building, I can pop my head out and take a video. But, nothing's certain here. So it is, I'm watching my country that I've lived in for several years just get obliterated and destroyed. And, I think it's just frustrating that we're still talking about the same problems we had 3 years ago.
I really appreciate that answer, Shaun. Some of the things you touch upon there, just one of them I'd like to ask you about before I hand it to the panel. You talked about people that try to, the kind of letting one's emotions be seen. You had in captivity a paid Russian propagandist who really wanted to to do is he really wanted to film your emotions, and you know the guy. I can't even bring myself to say his name, but he's British in origin and he's lived in Russia for a while. People like that. And do you see any similarities with that kind of behavior and what you saw at the White House on Friday, where you saw the leader of Ukraine get berated and antagonized by Trump and Vance, who have obviously never served their country and have no concept of what Ukrainians have been enduring?
Not really. I mean, I tried to allude to the fact that Zelensky asked Vance one question and he answered it. He said, have you been to Ukraine to see the problems we have? And Vance just ummed and erred, and just said, I've seen the stories. And I just sat there gobsmacked that the VP has just, then I think he knew that was weak, and then started to bring Trump in and then build up the fact that you come here to the Oval Office because it was a weak answer. And the Trump administration is weak. I mean, we've heard publicly the concessions that Ukraine has to make. He's aired them everywhere, yet Putin isn't airs any. There doesn't seem to be any. So, he's now pretty much abused Zelensky the minute he got out of the car about the way he dressed. He allowed the press team, who was Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend, Marjorie Taylor Greene being the Republican congressman, is it, or senator, I can't remember, who referred to the Ukrainian population as Nazis. He was allowed to freely berate Zelensky about his dress in the Oval Office, which, Zelensky took it quite well. And then so this wasn't just instantaneous, as a lot of the people go, oh, look at when you get 40 minutes in. This was just constant. Till the point that question was asked about 40 minutes in, he was constantly berated, constantly told about his appearance, put down with lies. He wanted to combat those lies. He was told to basically shut up. You're in the Oval Office. And then amazingly told to say, thank you. Did you say thank you today? I mean, the guy is permanently on X thanking people. He's done it about 90 times. He's constantly, I mean, it was just awful to watch. And it did remind me of those, just how those guys look so privileged in their suits, not really understanding the situation in Ukraine, but seeing stories, who were berating a guy who could have run from his country like Yanukovych and didn't, stayed to fight for his people. I mean, it was heartbreaking to watch him go through that, that berated and abuse, which I thought was just bully tactics in a way, with a lot of Trump's and Vance's friends. And Vance was like a child, to be fair, just laughing, abusing, laughing at Zelensky. It was awful.
It's like a child with a ODD, Shaun.
It was just awful. I mean, this wasn't a vice president. Disorder. This wasn't an American vice president. This was a child. I mean, the guy today is just said, referred to Britain as France as random countries. This was the Allies. We lost 470 odd soldiers fighting with them in Afghanistan, and now he's referred to us as just a random country. That's not a mistake. That's their thinking. That's their mentality. That's who they are, and that's really worrying. So I'm not a bit of a Trump optimist, but I don't want to, just when Putin sucked all the oxygen out of the room, now we've got this idiot who's, Trump, who's just equally as sucking the oxygen out of the room as well and monopolizing the headlines.
Couldn't agree more, Shaun. Couldn't agree more. And thanks, mate. Well, I'm going to hand it over to the panel because we've all got some pretty similar things to say on this. And so, panel, please say anything you want, or feel free to ask Shaun a question. Shaun, can I introduce you to Smokey? Actually, Smokey is from the US. Smokey, meet Shaun.
Hi, Shaun. It's wonderful to meet you, man.
Hi, good to meet you.
I want to start this off by saying thank you for your service. You've done incredible things, and you've been through an awful lot. I've not read your book yet, but I definitely plan on reading it. And I'm a veteran here in America. I was in the U.S. Army. I did 2 tours in Iraq myself, so I definitely empathize with you for everything you've been through. And I'll also acknowledge readily that the war I fought was entirely different from the war you fought, and what you went through, I'm sure, is much, much more difficult than what I did. But I do want to ask, or just like stay here, that I truly believe in my heart that most Americans support Ukraine. Most Americans are not a fan of Vladimir Putin. And all of us in that camp are rightfully horrified at what we're seeing, especially those of us that understand what the Kremlin's objective is here. And right now, a lot of Americans are protesting in the streets. I'm sadly not with them today. The weather's awful, and I have other commitments with my kids. But what else can we do to just show the world and everybody in it that we do care? This regime that's in power is not a reflection of the American people. Just what can we do as Americans to show the world that we are not the regime?
You could all campaign to get me a visa. That'd be amazing. I could come over then. Yeah, I'm really careful because I don't. I'm not an American basher. Obviously, I love America. I don't really tell on my social media. I don't really talk about how people should vote. It's your choice. I've never said if you don't want to put money into Ukraine, that is your prerogative. If you want to vote for that, that's your vote. I mean, it's. I would certainly try and change your mind and persuade you to do it, but it is your choice. I think. Like I said, I love America, and I refuse now on my social media to put America or US. I put Trump's administration because I know damn well it isn't all of America, and it's not even half of America that Trump talks. He talks a talk, but he doesn't even hold half of America. So I know that, and I speak to a lot of American friends, and I work with the American military still. So I know that. I mean, I'm finding the power of internet myself is quite good. The more profile I've got, the more I talk and argue the points. Recently, I just had a post weirdly go to about 7 million people, which is quite strange for me. I don't really get that. And somehow I broke Elon's algorithm. So I'm starting to learn about all that myself. It does have an impact as a group, a social group. Reposting, tweeting. You see the MAGA guys, and you see Trump do this. We should be fighting back on their own medium. We should get more people fighting back on their own medium. I've got a Blue Sky account now because people were moving off it. I think that's a big mistake. I got it as a backup because I don't know if Elon's going to cancel my account. But generally, I tell people to get back on Twitter and start arguing a case back. You can't do much about bots, but when you start having a ton of bots coming at you, you start to recognize them. Also, keep campaigning and keep going out on the streets and saying the truths against, Trump's absolute garbage of, 350 billion we've given you. And that needs to be tackled because he's not just doing it to Zelensky the other day. He did it to Starmer. Macron had to rein him in nicely. I mean, Trump's just pumping out garbage, and you can't let a bully just get away with it all the time. You need to tackle him. I mean, that's one of the reasons they hate Zelensky, because he's, he is a hero. He did stay and fight. I suspect Trump and Vance would have trampled over old grannies to get to a helicopter to bug out. So they're not of the same ilk. They wouldn't have stayed. They would have gone. So I think there's a lot of jealousy and a lot of hatred for Zelensky because, Vance mentioned it quite recently. I think it was today or yesterday, saying he's put on a pedestal. Yeah, you're damn right he did. Because look at what he's doing. You know, he's doing this, fighting corruption, fighting the Russians, holding back. I mean, he's doing it. You know, they're just jealous of that, and they don't like that. So I mean, keep fighting those those falsities and arguing online and basically I tell people to support from their home Ukraine, from their home countries, because we get a lot of people come over. So I could always recommend charities and support groups if people want to help out, because there's like 6-9 million forced refugees. I mean, it's crazy. They need help. They've lost everything, and we need to help them. So I appreciate all the support, especially you living in America. Everybody in America who supports Ukraine, I really do thank you immensely, because you are the silent heroes. To be fair, there's a lot of good work goes on, and nobody gets recognised for it. That's done by the volunteers and the support. So it's you guys that need the thanks, really.
I can get you a visa for $5 million.
Yeah, I know. I expect you'd probably be cheaper than Trump, and I need to get a gold card, I think.
Thank you, Shaun. I really appreciate your insight there, man, and we're definitely going to keep up the fight here.
Yeah, please do. Stabilis is my battalion motto. Hold firm, stand fast. So, never more so has that been appropriate to me now through this hard time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
We really value you here, Shaun. Panel, we don't want to take up too much of your time, Shaun. We're conscious of how much you give for Ukraine and the wider world. But anyone from the audience in the chat, anyone else, please go ahead and ask Shaun any questions you'd like.
We do need to win the information war. I've just seen that pop up. That's what I just talked about. It's about winning the information war and not letting people get away with really getting Trump get away with this disinformation and misinformation. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, just a battle on about that recently, was talking about the churches, are closing in Ukraine. And hold on a minute, you didn't mention once that Putin's blowing them up. It's like, what? It's, I live here, the oppression of the Russian speakers. Hold on, I am a Russian speaker from East Ukraine. So is my family, so are my friends. I've just watched the Russian speakers get massacred in Mariupol, over 25,000 of them, including women and children, and those are conservative figures. So these narratives that they're spinning need to be, corrected, and people need to understand, actually what's happening here. Because Russia, Putin is an ICC indicted war criminal for, taking children. I mean, they're taking Ukraine's youngest and brightest from the occupied territories. They're recruiting Ukrainians, forcibly conscripted to fight fight against their own country. And our families are over there in the other side. So we get that information, and we're able to really fight those false narratives that clearly the Trump administration are pumping out.
Why do you think they're doing that, Shaun? Why since 2014 under Dr. Lisa Glinka and to this day under Belova, Putin, why in your opinion, do they deport Ukrainians and forcibly adopt them? Why do they do this?
It's not just that. I mean, they've got ethnic cleansing policies. The government's running, they don't call them ethnic cleansing policies, but they're running policies to resettle Ukrainians from those areas into Russia and bringing Russians back into that's part of their matter. That's part of their procedures. Their family are struggling to hold on to their home in Mariupol. There's massive corruption problems in Mariupol, where they've renamed the streets, left plots of houses off, sold them to other people, and the people living in them have to evacuate or get out of their house because they illegally sold the plot, and then suddenly it magically mysteriously appears on a plot, but somebody else owns it from Russia. Ukrainians homeless. So this is like ongoing corruption in Mariupol now, and the ethnic cleansing policy is just horrific, and now we've got the added bonus of probably, they're thinking about bringing the death penalty into the occupied territories. That's just legalized genocide. And it means they're struggling to hold on to those areas as well. I mean, it's just dreadful, dreadful what's happening there. And why America promotes that, I don't know. I think there's a mixture of money, commercial interests. I think, politically, I think people should be looking at Trump's finances and going through that and seeing where this all lies, because how on earth has America got to its point, the bastions of free speech and democracy, that, the leaders of the free world got them into a situation they're now, really partnering up with an ICC wanted war criminal who's taken over 700,000 children, according to their figures, and Maria Lvova-Belova. So these are not figures I'm sort of spouting. They're their own figures, and the concentration style camps they run, openly electrocuting people, and the executions of Ukrainian POWs have not gone down, they've gone up. Why isn't those people that should be saying something? And yet, Trump's like, we shouldn't be looking to Putin and Russia, and you're just thinking, you have to be bought out. You're crazy. How can you trust someone who's then saying, I'm trying to sort you a peace agreement? It's just balmy. It's like, I sit here getting frustrated about it in my house in Geneva, going, how is anybody taking this guy serious that he's dealing with a peace when he's so, pro-Russian, and his staff are just mimicking the Kremlin? I mean, it's so frustrating. So I don't know the intricacies about it. I'm just a trigger puller. I don't really know the ins and outs of, why that's the case. I mean, you've got tenant media now who are being paid a shit ton of money to promote Russian propaganda. And those guys have never even been to Ukraine, but see overnight become an expert on it. I mean, this is the culture we're living in. I mean, it's social media, the internet's opened up to everybody to corruption. And some of these people, unfortunately, will sell their country out for a payday. And that's the truth of it, really. And we need to tackle this. We need to tackle this and censor Russia Today. I mean, how they've got a platform on Rumble, I don't know, airing all their content out on the internet. Even X here has RT running it out. They're garbage. RT were complicit in my torture. They're a media arm of the Kremlin. So, it's very frustrating to see on Western platforms and Western media, the very journalists that were in the room shaking hands with the guys that were electrocuting you. It's extremely hard to see that. When I see them on X platform and all these people criticize Ukraine who have never even been to Ukraine or the Eastern Bloc or Russia, come to think of it, and Tucker Carlson's another one, that was just sickly, going to the supermarket and just talking about bread, fresh produce and escalators. He's going, look, we've got escalators. We've had escalators in Ukraine since I'd been here in 2018. So, it's not like a new invention. And the bread's pretty good in Ukraine too. So, it's just advertising, money, and Russia's paying a lot of people a lot of money to spin this Russian propaganda.
Yeah, those pieces fit together pretty well, Shaun. We've certainly seen the US relinquish its position of influence in Europe and the wider world. But I really don't want to take up too much of your time because of the valuable work that you do for Ukraine and allies such as all of us here. So,
Jonathan, can I ask one more question? Are you wrapping up?
Yeah, absolutely. No, go ahead, mate. It's fine.
I'm here for you. I'm at no limit.
Oh, great. So yeah, I was wondering, Shaun, I mean, obviously you spent a lot of time in Ukraine. You're married to a Ukrainian. One thing we don't hear a lot about in the Western media is just like, what is the Ukrainian sentiment right now? Like, what what are people thinking? Like, what is the word? I'm particularly interested if you talk to any people in the military who are, in combat right now, what they're thinking about it. But also, in Dnipropetrovsk, that's a city that is very, not quite a frontline city, but like very, very close to being so. So just like, how do people feel on the street about the current situation and like what they think Ukraine should do, or just generally their feelings?
That's a good question, because there's a mixture there. I mean, most of the civilians just go about the daily business and carry on doing what they're doing. Most people know someone that's either been captured, killed, serving. So generally, there's a big community spirit. I mean, this country's huge, but I'm always fascinated that people say there's 6 degrees of separation. Since this war, it's probably about 3 in Ukraine. Everybody knows everybody else. It's quite interesting. And also, I speak to the military. There's 2 sides of that too. I posted something today on my social media on X saying where Americans have got together from the front, American volunteers, saying it's really, really bad to see our president just regurgitating Russian narratives and Russian propaganda. And these were Americans on the front line, in Ukraine, going, what on earth is going on? So you do have, there's no real sentiment here for an election as far as I know. I've not bumped into people saying Zelensky needs to go. Not at all, not one. I think Zelensky's put Ukraine on the map. I think they're quite content with him. I think his popularity, by all accounts, actually went up. The more Trump attacks him, his popularity just ends up getting increasing, because he's not just fighting Putin, he's protecting his country against dodgy deals from Trump now. So, and the people can see that, and he's getting a lot of respect here for that. Also, his international appeal don't think it took much of a hit from that encounter at the Oval Office. I think many people felt really sorry for him, that he was invited to come all that way just to be trapped in a room with Trump. So I do believe that we can move forward. It's not actually whether Ukraine wants peace. It's actually whether Trump wants to do this. Like I've been saying through our interview, it's alarming that they're talking, the Russian narratives. I don't want to go backtrack over that, but it is alarming. So, I think, you can't really call Trump an ally. While you can call Americans allies, you can't really call Trump an ally and his administration. And that's very dangerous for Ukraine. But I think that meeting at the Oval Office just really cemented that. And I think there's going to be a lot of political games going on to get things done. But generally, I don't see any change here. There's no real change. I think it knocks a bit of morale. But what happened on the Oval Office actually made people angry, not upset, or it just made people really angry. I mean, here the Ukrainians were making like skit videos of in Ukrainian, which I've posted on, which are hilarious, and and they would make jokes out of it. The humor here is pretty good in Ukraine. It's not like Russian humor. They do have a great sense of humor in. And the irony as well is quite good here, and satire as well is pretty good. Look at Zelensky; he made a program about Ukrainian satire, so political satire. So it's I don't think it's had much of an impact here in Ukraine at the moment. I think some politicians here are looking at as maybe a gap to jump, and push, but. Generally, Poroshenko and the other staunch opposition, Julia, I can't remember, Timoshenko, they've actually aligned with Zelensky, and they're bitter enemies, but they've actually said we need unity, and unity is the important one here. And, we need to show a face. So even Zelensky's staunch political opponents have shown unity and backing. So that should tell you everything. And then still, the Trump administration's talking about removing Trump. I mean, it's just balmy. I mean, you never heard of it, have you? The US democracy, US administration talking about removing a democratically elected leader in Europe. I mean, it's almost Putin-esque. So it is worrying times, but I don't see much change here, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Shaun. Shaun, we saw the pictures which Zelensky tried to show Trump in the Oval Office, right, of the soldiers, how they are coming back, and it's not only the soldiers, right? It's also the civilians which have to go through these kind of filtration camps and so on. Did you account any stories? Was there made a difference between like soldiers or civilians in these filtration camps, or can you describe how was your impression?
I wasn't going to get through a filtration process because I do speak Russian, but I speak Russian with a Cockney London accent, so it wasn't going to get me through, and it's a bit clunky. So I wasn't going to get through the filtration process. So I was taken to a black site where after isolation for several days, I was taken into a cell underground where they had a 19-year-old train driver from Mariupol. Never been in the military in his life. He was just a train driver. And he was getting beaten and had been electrocuted on the ears. And there was no difference. I was in the general population at Makivka with DPR citizens who, had avoided serving in the draft, didn't want to fight. So they were then put into the prison with me, and I was speaking to them. Even a DPR politician that were fought in Gibraltar for the DPR, Donetsk People's Republic. So I was even put in a cell with him, and we had some interesting conversations. And he said, "Here's my email. Give me a ring when you leave. We're not all monsters." And he helped me out at the right dark time. So I learned a lot about being in prison with various characters that, some people did believe in a Donetsk People's Republic, but didn't want Russia to come in and take over. Well, look what happened. So, some of those were in prison. We wanted a republic, but we didn't want Russia in controlling everything. So look what happened there. That was always going to be the case. So, I learned quite a lot in captivity about the geopolitical situation and the demographics of the people in there and their views. And actually, when you're in prison, generally, prison's prison. I wasn't a POW, so I was in general population, and the prison rules go for everybody. So there isn't really you just got to survive that. But there was no difference treatment. The civilians were taken to filtration camps and places underground and used tapics and torture. One I spoke to had been through a waterboard. And of course, I was in prison with two NGOs who weren't anything to do with the military. They were charity workers. One of them was beaten to death beaten so badly at the prosecutor's office. He was literally died of his injuries 2 days later, essentially beaten to death. So there wasn't much you could do about it. So, everybody was treated the same. I think we got it essentially worse because we were Brits, or what they called Nyomnik, which is mercenaries. So, I never left the country. I had legal status in, and yet I was trialed as a mercenary. So I was on trial with other people, and they were behind me in the court process. And, who they were, I don't know. But no, there's no justice system in Russia. And torture is an intricate part of how they process everybody through. It's not used. I'll just finish off there. It's not used in the way that people seem to think, like James Bond, we're going to torture you for information. What they do is they use torture basically to get you to admit to places you haven't been and things you haven't done. And that is generally how they use torture. And what happens then is once you've said guilty, you're in the system, and that takes all the emphasis off Putin, because he can just say, he pleaded guilty, so he's obviously guilty. He died in prison. Not my problem. Yeah. So generally, that's how the system works. But yeah, that happens to everybody, civilian or military.
So they basically try to subdue you, right? Like try to break you, and not like to get any valuable information out of you.
Didn't really ask it. It was geared up really for an exchange. So I didn't know that at the time, but they just wanted me to say guilty.
I'm made in general, right? Like that's the thing. They just want to hear
Yeah.
you're guilty and you, yeah. But yeah, the accounts you gave here is like showing more and more, and I think this is what the U.S. administration needs to understand. This is not an ally. It's not about Russia being the good guy, or
No.
and it's for me hard to understand that they ignore all these
Yeah.
facts, didn't see all these facts, or they just don't believe it and have eaten so much Russian propaganda that they just like don't believe these things are happening. But like we are sadly seeing them every day on Twitter, on the internet, and on other platforms. And you experienced it in real life.
I think another podcast said I have a unique view. I sort of felt obligated to. I mean, part of the writing the book was really Russia held me, and while they held me, they created this narrative about me, and that just got me really angry. So when I was exchanged, I was so angry what I was seeing on the news and how they portrayed me, that I wanted to tell my own story. So it was, I had some good advice and some help, and I'd written some things, but actually I wrote a book, and the literature agent said it reads like a Transformers movie. You're going to need some help with that. So it's like, well, that's how it happened. It just went super fast, super quick, and bah, 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 bah. And it's like, no, you can't write a book like that. So I had a bit of help, but it was about explaining, my side of the story, to be fair.
Yeah, that's also very important. Thank you, Shaun.
Well, Shaun, we really appreciate your time today. I should probably say thank you to our panel, thank you to our audience, who they know that our website tochnyi.info. I need to just drop this information, is where you can find people can find published research from people like Brendan, Artem, Daniela, Erland, and others on topics like FPV interceptions, Russian war crimes in Ukraine, Russian ammunition sites, and other topics. But thank you, Shaun, for joining us today. Thank you for the work you have done, and thank you for the work you continue to do.
Thank you. No, it's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. I hope it's been worthwhile.
Very much so. Thank you, Shaun. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям слава.
Heroям slava.
Slava Nazi.
Smert ворогам.
On behalf of the brave.